counterfeit products and everything else. So it is difficult to track down the dark web people, mainly because you cannot just do a Google search and find the dark web. You have to use what's called a Tor browser that bounces you off of different anonymous servers. So law enforcement has been recently successful in tracking down criminals there. They have shut down some child trafficking type crimes. So if your identity was stolen, it will most likely end up there. Nowadays, there are security organizations like companies that involve themselves in cybersecurity. They track the dark web and see if if any data breaches or any of people's information, customer information, if it comes online on the dark web. So they immediately turn around and notify the company. The most recent example was, if you know T-Mobile. T-Mobile is like Airtel for the US. So they are a major mobile services provider there. 2 months back, they had a major breach of their database. There were millions of customer information, including active and inactive customers. It was stolen and it was released on the dark web. So one organization, they found that a person was selling it, and they immediately went back and notified T-Mobile. With US, stealing of private information is liable, like you'll be tried in court of law, and there might be fines associated with not protecting your customer information properly. So, in short, that's the dark web. But it's something that's being currently, investigated or being tracked. Previously, you could go there and get anything illegal you wanted.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. So at the end of this session, there will be a quiz. I think 8 to 10 questions mostly. So let's get started. Let me share my screen. We'll just go over what we talked yesterday. Quick revision. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Sounds good. So yesterday we went over the definition of cybersecurity. It's the practice of protecting information during processing, transit, and at rest. So we went through career options, certification options, and what you got to do from here. We went over what's the difference between white hat, black hat, and gray hat hackers. So white hats are the ethical hackers. Gray hats are a blend of both white hat and black hat, whereas black hats are criminals. The main difference between a white hat and a gray hat is a white hat gets permission or rules of engagement, whereas a gray hat does not do it. Usually they are profit seeking. So they find out a vulnerability, they expect some kind of recognition or reward in return. So I talked about code of ethics, so don't go to the dark side. We talked about different teams within the cybersecurity realm. The red team are the ethical hackers. They test the organization, they perform what's called penetration testing, they simulate attacks, and they provide the organization with reports of what needs to be improved with respect to security. We have the blue team, those are the defenders. So they constantly look for breaches, they defend the organization. We have the purple team, which is when both the blue team and red team work together. While the blue team attacks your organization, while the red team attacks your organization, the blue team tries to defend it. They look for alerts or any lights popping up. So that becomes a purple engagement. sorry, I spoke about the yellow team. The orange team is to kind of inspire the yellow team to think like attackers. The green team kind of works with the blue team to develop defenses for the organization. So the yellow team, again, they design the software, build out your infrastructure. I did not mention one team that's the center of it all. That's the white team. So the white team is your managers, your CEOs, your CISOs. So they are the people who ultimately drive the decision making in the organization. So there will be compliance analysts as well. Sometimes you have to go according to regulations. You have to implement certain controls because they are required by law. So the white team is kind of the decision makers. So all the teams kind of report to the white team. So we just discussed about critical security controls for a bank you might implement. We defined what's an encryption decryption. Encryption is when you transform a plain text into or scramble it into a ciphertext. Decryption is the other way around. The important components are the algorithm and the key. So key is the easiest way to decrypt or encrypt. So without the key, it's difficult to go both ways. We discussed about flaws in ATM cards and ATM machines, how attackers were able to bypass encryption mechanisms. We talked about user psychology, how to keep people in mind when designing secure systems. We talked about replay attacks, when you want to remotely unlock your car. We talked about what's called a pseudo-random number generator, a number that's used only once, so that a replay attack cannot be performed. We talked about differences between identification and authentication. Identification is who you profess to be. Authentication is verifying the identity. We talked about authentication. What are the 5 factors of it? Something you know, password or PIN, something you have, mobile phone or card, something you are, fingerprint, biometrics, somewhere you are, geolocation, something you do, your gesture or pattern on your phone. If you have a combination of 2 or more, it's called a multi-factor authentication. All right, any questions? Okay. How do I move this? One second here. Okay. So yesterday, I asked you to choose a good complex password. That's something difficult for attackers to break through brute force or enumerating all the characters. And I also asked you to kind of make sure it's something you can remember. So this is the results. I think 11 people took up the poll. Okay, those here. So summer at 2021. It's a good guess. It has capital letters, small letters, symbols, and numbers. Few of you choose winter, where a couple of characters are substituted. Few of you choose password. I was surprised, just the one substitution, that some of you consider this complex. A few of you also choose a random selection of all characters. I would say this is very good guess compared to everything else. I'm happy that nobody chose the QWERTY one. Let's see about the last one, shall we? Okay. You're still able to see my screen, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So how does somebody define complexity? So complexity in the password realm is what's called password entropy. Entropy simply is a definition of how complex your password is, how difficult it is to break your password. It is a function of the sample set of characters you choose. That's called cardinality. And also it's a function of length. I don't want to go too much into the mathematics of it, but remember, if you choose all numbers, lowercase, uppercase letters, your sample space or your cardinality is 95. And if you choose a longer password, it also helps because the function says s to the power of L. So if you choose a large sample size and a long password, you will have a higher entropy. So the higher the entropy, higher the complexity. So that's why when you go into websites, they force you to choose everything, and they also ask you to choose a longer password. So let us test how our options look like. So I gave you 4. So there are websites that can test your entropy. So I'm using nordpass.com/secure-password. So this is a website. So let's see how our strength is. First one, moderate. The time to crack this password, 46 minutes. So it is a complex password, but the problem with it is a lot of people use it frequently. So these are common passwords where you see when organizations try to enforce password change frequently. Sometimes you'll see organizations saying every 3 months you must change your password. If you have used a bank, I think it's once every 6 months. What happens when you force people to change passwords once every 3 months is they'll usually choose passwords that go along with the weather and the year. So that's what this password is. So summer at 2021. So if you force somebody to change their password during the months of like March, April, May, they usually choose this one. And that's why it takes just 46 minutes to break this password. Let's test our next one. I'm just copying and pasting it. So weak. So thankfully nobody selected it because it is the string of characters on the first line of your keyboard in the alphabets, QWERTY, UIOP. Time it takes is less than a second. Let's go to the next one. Password. A lot of you thought this was complex. Let's see. Less than a second. And the password has been exposed so many times. So if you use password and password or any combination of passwords, you most likely have leaked your credentials somewhere. So it's time to change it. Let's go to the next one. 2-letter substitutions for winter. Again, weak. Takes less than a second. Password has been exposed 2 times. So the reason is, even though there are a couple of substitutions, the length is really short. So I've told you, like, even if you choose your sample space to include everything, you still got to make sure your length of the password is also taken into account. So the longer the password, higher the entropy. Let me go to the last one first. A random sampling of a bunch of characters. Okay, password strength is moderate. Time to crack your password, 12 days. The reason is, again, you chose everything in it, but there wasn't a lot of characters in terms of length. So going to the next one. This looks simple, doesn't it? Let's test it. Password strength, strong. I didn't use every character in the character set, but look at the time it takes to crack your password, centuries. So in conclusion, the length of your password is more so important than the sample space you take. So this is what I call as a passphrase. So it's not a password. It's 4 randomly selected dictionary words, the common English words. I'm concatenating those together. I'm trying to form something like a sentence. So this is kind of complex. We saw this. And it's also easy to remember, right? You might choose 4 words from your favorite song. And just you can just say something. For example, in this one, I can develop what's called a mnemonic for it. Say, okay, I met the correct horse, and next to the horse, there was a battery stapled to a tree. So if you can develop a mnemonic around 4 common dictionary words, you'll easily get to around 20, 25 characters in your password. Of course, organizations today, they don't accept something like this. They always force you to choose something like from every character set that's available. Going forward, I think they will all go to the standard. So they'll let you choose a really long password. I hope so, because while you can choose random password and they are secure, it's very difficult to remember something like this. What you end up doing is you try to reset your password and you'll try to choose something that's relatively simple like this one. And you will also reuse it across multiple sites. So from an organization perspective, that's really not secure, because if sometimes you might give out just one credential to a hacker, the hacker may end up having credentials to Facebook, Instagram, your bank's website, because you're reusing the same password everywhere. So that's, again, not a best practice. So always try to go for a passphrase instead of a password. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, so password policies. So policies are something that's enforced by organizations. So some of these are kind of developing to be known as what's called poor password policies. So the government, US government, NIST is trying to get people to go away from these things. The first one, as I mentioned, is to change passwords frequently. So that'll cause you to select weak passwords. The next one is forcing use of random password. Again, we discussed why that's a not good thing. Sometimes organization will hand you out a password for maybe a device or an equipment that you have to work on. I mean, the password will be secure. It'll have all the random characters in it. The problem is you won't be able to remember something like that. So asking for your mother's maiden name. I think banks commonly do this when you try to initiate a transaction or something. The problem is with the development of social media sites now, this is relatively easy to find, right? So you tag your mom, you tag your dad in your photographs. So asking for a mother's maiden name is really not something just that you would know. Most likely attackers can browse your profiles and find that out. Using default password. How many of you use the same password that came with your Wi-Fi router or your Geo module? So it's always recommended that you change it. So it's not a problem with personal use. It's a problem in organizations as well. They sometimes get an equipment, they get a switch or a router. It usually has the default password pasted on it or near the serial number. They don't change it. That's something that attackers will very easily crack because the default passwords of most models are available on the internet. Okay, so poor password practices. A policy is something that's enforced by an organization. A practice is something that you do. As I mentioned, reusing the same password across sites, using a weak password, and most importantly, sharing your password. Sometimes in work, your manager might call you and ask, hey, something has gone down. I need your password. Or your colleague might do that. Hey, I don't have access to the system. Please give me a password. I need to do something urgent. So this will be something that's taken upon very seriously because sort of big organizations like TCS, Infosys, they are really concerned about password sharing. And if you really share your password, you might be penalized. So never share your password with colleagues, with your manager, or even at home. Don't share it. So good password practices. Say if you're forced to develop something complex, I would recommend using a password manager. So I'm not sure if one of you are using it already. I use Lastpass, if you're able to see my screen. So Lastpass is a browser extension where you can use it to remember all your passwords. It's more secure than using a browser to remember your passwords because I personally like LastPass because they don't actually archive your password somewhere. It's only known to your local PC. And you're also able to just go to a website, click on this, and you'll be able to log in. So I don't have to remember a ton of passwords. I always use LastPass for it. There is a master password that you have to give it so that it'll log you in for the first time. And afterwards, it remembers it. So you don't have to click your type in your complex passwords anytime. So the next one I wanted to talk about is two-factor authentication. I told you, right? A combination of one of the 5 factors of authentication. Today, we mostly use OTPs. When you get something through your post or when you use Aadhaar, for example. I would recommend you use two-factor authentication for checking your email, for a bank, or wherever they make it available to you. That's 99% guarantees your account will be secure. Because even if a hacker manages to get your credentials, they will still need that one-time password for them to authenticate. And the last one, use passphrases. I told you the use of it and the feasibility of remembering or something like that. And also, it gives you the ability to select a really long password, and it goes very far in terms of complexity than selecting all characters in the alphabet. Any questions so far? No? Next one. So let's go to the opponents. So from an organization perspective, from a company perspective, so who are your opponents? Who are your attackers? The first one is foreign governments. So they're usually called advanced persistent threats. For the US, at least, I think their most persistent threat might be Russia or China. So you might have heard on the news about the hacking of a US-based software or tool it's called Solarwinds. It was on the news this year. So Solarwinds, it was a tool. Solarwinds is a tool to kind of monitor your network equipment, your servers. It will tell you whether your network, a specific switch is up or down. If it'll tell you if some application is not working on your server. So it kind of has a fingerprint of your entire network. So what it means is SolarWinds has high privilege access to your network. So most government agencies were using it, but Russia, they've been attributed to it, was able to successfully infiltrate into the product using a supply chain attack. I'll talk to you about it. And able to spy on the US government agencies for more than a year. The difference between ordinary criminals and advanced persistent threat is APTs in general have a lot of resources and a lot of expertise. Criminals, sometimes they come from bottom up, they are like script kiddies and they get recruited into shady organizations. They may or may not have the resources at one point, but APTs, they are a properly organized entity. They are very well funded. So most organizations like to be aware of their activities. So if you want to find out more about criminals or APTs, there is a website, attack.miter.org/groups. So this website is a mostly used framework to find out about attackers, their different tactics, different persistent mechanisms, things like that. So if you see here, you will see a list of all the advanced persistent threats. So they're given code names. They're also given some kind of nicknames as well. Russians are usually called bears, cozy bear, fancy bear. Chinese are usually called the pandas. So wicked panda. So it's called it's a Chinese state-sponsored espionage group. So if you want to know more about them, you can visit the website, and clicking on one of these APTs will give you the list of all the techniques they will use. So this is how the US government was able to attribute the infiltration of Solarwinds within a specific country. So they have a database, it's available to everybody, of the specific behaviors that these APTs display. So using this, they will most likely say, okay, this was done by Russia, this was done by China, so things like that. So there are specific fingerprints as to what tools they might possess. So you'll see this here and how they get into your network. So this website is also useful to look at all the attacker techniques. So this is an open source tool that's kind of crowdsourced and contributed to by major security organizations. And many antiviruses, endpoint security devices. So they try to map their tools to these techniques. So you might see, how attackers are able to first do reconnaissance, how they initially gain access, how they execute threats or attacks, how they persist within your network, how they escalate privileges, so on and so forth. And the last phase is command and control. So that's when they take over your entire organization's servers and networks. So each technique is very involved. It might interest you to go into this and look at how they kind of infiltrate your networks. Any questions? Okay, so we looked at opponents in terms of foreign governments and criminals. The next one are researchers. So why researchers are sometimes called opponents? So when I mentioned about gray hat, so sometimes what researchers will do is, they will be very intelligent. They're very capable in terms of cybersecurity. They will find out a vulnerability and they won't disclose it in the proper way. Sometimes they will just find a vulnerability and to gain an exposure, they might release the exploit code in Twitter. So what that'll do is, one, it'll give hackers the ability to quickly replicate that code and scan the internet in order to find targets. So it does not give organizations the time to fix a weakness. Okay, so what people have come up with, major vendors have come up with, are what's called zero-day initiatives, which are about, they try to define policies. They try to define how you have to disclose a weakness. So say, for example, you own a product like Amazon Alexa or some kind of mobile phone, and you're looking into it, you found a major vulnerability or weakness, don't go and release it on Twitter. So the usual policy, or according to major vendors, is you notify them in a secure way, publish a proof of concept code, and you allow the vendor, in case you found something in Alexa, you notify Amazon, you tell them that in a secure way, and you give them a time frame. It's usually 60 to 90 days. So before that duration is expired, do not go and release the code on Twitter or any public platforms. So that gives an opportunities for hackers to turn back. And if you do that, you might also be criminally liable. So give them time to fix it. And once they're able to fix it, you might be able to publish the code out on your blog or Twitter or whatever. So that gives an opportunity for the vendor to develop a patch, and also for other organizations who are their customers to implement the security update. Next category are hacktivists. Hacktivists are people who claim they fight for a cause, right? And they deface websites. An example group is Anonymous, if you have heard about them. I think they attacked some Visa and MasterCard websites, claiming they were in support or defending certain ideologies. So these people generally cause some kind of disruption. So they want to disrupt the functioning of an organization. They usually don't seek profits, but they claim they do something for a political or social or religious cause. The other major opponents are victims of or attackers who try to stalk you, on the internet, or try to abuse your personal information, send out fakes, or try to put you down in front of other people. So all these things are kind of the bad acts on the internet. So these are some things that organizations are on the lookout for. These are some things we want to defend against. So just be aware. Any questions so far? Okay. Question time. So we'll talk about risk. Okay, so if you can go to the website slido.com and enter your code, you will be asked a poll. So you're traveling from Chennai to Mumbai. Which of the two options do you consider safe? Flying on an airplane, driving your car? So let me know. Anybody have issues signing in? Okay. Give me a couple of minutes, I'll be back. Easy question, right? Quick answers, please. Anybody else? Okay. So most of you have selected the correct option. Flying on an airplane is much safer than driving your car, because statistically speaking, there have been a very less number of airplane accidents versus driving your car. You might think you are in control of everything, you're in control of traveling, but you're more prone to accidents as well. So this gives an idea about what you think about as risky or not risky, right? Similarly, In security also, we have risk. So we always go by evaluating whether a risk will materialize, what are the chances of a hacker attacking a network, because we cannot say with certainty that a hacker will hack your network. You're exposed to this, and you cannot say for certain that you're safe as well. So there is always a calculation to say, how likely are you to be attacked or hacked. So the common terms that are used are threat. So a threat is a circumstance or event that has the possibility to cause a failure. So example, hackers, viruses, and storms, right? So hackers have a potential to cause a failure of your security system, either your servers, networks, desktops. If they get into your network, they have the potential to cause damage. The same goes for virus. Storms like thunderstorms, landslides. So they're also threats, right? So if you have a data center or a building which houses all your critical IT systems, and if it were to be affected by a flood, you will have a denial of service, or you won't be able to function. So a threat is something that will cause a failure, that has the potential to cause a failure. We have to define what a vulnerability is. I might have used this during the course. A vulnerability is a weakness within your hardware, software, or a user, right? So a hardware vulnerability might be an open port where on a switch where an attacker might be able to plug in his laptop and you might be able to hack your network. A software vulnerability, this is more prevalent, where you have weaknesses in the way you develop code. For example, I talked about SQL injection yesterday, where you don't properly validate the fields that you have in your web form. An attacker might be able to run code there. So it's a weakness in your software. So you don't correctly validate what's being inputted, what's being put as an input in your software. The user is also a weakness. Sometimes they are the major weakness because you're liable to scams. So hackers always try to contact the user. So hacking something technically is possible, but it's much more difficult from an attacker perspective because of the various protections organizations have in place. But it's a lot easier to perform social engineering. So you might have seen that in movies as well, right? So you have a very secure locker. You might have a very protected jewel in a place, but you attack the security guard and you're through, or you take the security guard away from the cameras, and you're able to navigate the place. So things like that. The major weakness, even if you have a lot of security, your weakness is always going to be the user. So organizations, from their perspective, they always try to allocate budgets to train their employees to recognize attacks, to recognize scam emails, to recognize scam calls. So because of this factor, the user is a weak link. Finally, we define what's called a risk. The risk is a likelihood that a threat exploiting a vulnerability would cause a failure. So that's why I told, it's a calculation of how much chances does the threat has to materialize because you have a vulnerability. A good example is your weather system, right? You might always see the news and they might tell there is 20% chance of rain or 30% chance of rain. So what that means is, they cannot definitively say there will be rain or no rain, but when they mention it in chances, there is a likelihood of it. So that's the best they can do because weather systems are complex and, nobody can say with certainty. When they say it with percentages, it gives them a better control of the metrics of the chances. So even they say only when there is a 10% chance of rain, you can go out without an umbrella and say, okay, there is very less chance of it raining. So it gives you that confidence. That's all it says. So risk calculations are made with respect to threats and vulnerabilities because an organization, as like your weather system, security is complex. They cannot definitively say whether a threat will materialize or it won't, whether this weakness is too big or too small. So they'll try to make a calculation to say how likely a vulnerability will be exploited by a threat. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So name a couple of industries that make their profits out of risk assessments. It's easy. First, gambling. So gambling is all about chances. You have your cards, blackjack. You have a dice, craps. So casinos, at least, I don't know if you have to go, there is something like this in Goa or in the US, there are casinos. So the saying is the casino always wins because they slightly adjust the odds so that, you might win a couple times, but if you keep on playing, statistically, you're bound to lose. So they make the slight tweak in rules to make you look like you're winning at the beginning, but if you start playing again and again, mathematically, you cannot win. The other industry that benefits out of the risk is your insurance industry. So you might have insurance agents come to your place, or you might have insurance agents in your family as well. So when you pay a premium to your insurance company, you place a certain bet that you might fall sick. When you pay your health insurance, for example, they place a bet that you won't fall sick. So that's why you have questions like, do you smoke, do you drink, or do you have such and such diseases? So they try to make an assessment of how likely, how possible it is for you to fall sick. So if they find you to be relatively healthy, you might see your premiums going low on the lower end. If you're having some issues, pre-existing conditions, you might see higher premiums, what you pay on a monthly basis. So they take those small premiums and they pull them into a bucket. And essentially, they pay it out for the 10% of people who fall sick. So the remaining 90% is profit. So these are examples of how risk management is very prevalent in all industries. So even more so in the security industry these days. Any questions? Okay. All right. So how do we evaluate risk, right? As security professionals, when you go into organization, or even if you're in finance or in any kind of insurance industries, for example, you will have to constantly evaluate risk. So as a security professional, you have to understand that your mission of the organization, sometimes or most of the times, your organization exists to make profits. So when you go and talk security, closing down everything is not an option, right? So when you increase your security controls, you might affect productivity, right? You say you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't implement this product because this is insecure, you can't do this, So as you stack security controls, your organization might feel their productivity or their profits are going down. So you have to understand there needs to be a balance between security and workability. So evaluate risks accordingly. Next aspect is managing risk. As I mentioned, every security control has a cost because any new product you bring in, it's going to cost thousands and sometimes even millions of dollars. So if you're bringing a relatively advanced security product, you must be able to explain why that cost is far more than the risk, right? You cannot, just for one laptop, you should not be implementing a $10,000 security control. The laptop must have a business risk associated with it. Say, if this laptop is hacked by a hacker, if you are able to justify that you're losing $20,000, if that is the kind of information this laptop has, right? But the security control is only going to cost you $5,000, that is a good investment. So you might have to justify the cost whenever you are proposing a security control. The next aspect is decision-making. As professionals, you will ultimately be the person recommending something, but you won't be the person giving the money for it. So you have to always be in a position to explain how risky is a vulnerability or a threat to the leadership and give them all the options possible, because your CEOs or CFOs, CISOs won't be really that technical. So they're only worried about how to make the business profitable, how to make it, keep it stay afloat, how to manage all the shareholders. They'll be worried about the stock market, things like that. When you explain security, you have to be able to explain, the risk of the cost and the risk of loss. And always remember, it's not everything about technology. I've told this before. Even today, we have this challenge. We have the technology available to work on things, but getting the process in place, getting the people involved to accept the changes that we propose to do is really difficult, because sometimes people may be, they won't be very tech savvy. They may be opposed to change. They really don't want somebody coming and changing how they work. They want to use the same tools they use every day. So you cannot go tell like 5,000 people, okay, this tool is no more secure, change everything. From tomorrow onwards, you have to work on a different software. No, so people won't accept something like that. So you have to be able to understand how people work, how you can implement processes, how you can document things. As security professionals, you will be in a position more than technology. You'll be very involved in all the processes and people working with businesses, leadership to get agreements, to kind of make those changes in an incremental manner, test those changes. So that'll be a lot of your work. Any questions so far? Okay. All right, so when you're confronted with mitigating something, when you're confronted with evaluating what's the risk of a threat to my organization, you'll be evaluating these 4 options. So first one is risk acceptance. So acceptance is, you accept that, the risk will always continue to be there. I'm not worried about it. For example, whenever you get on a bike or even you start driving your car, you accept the risk that there might be accidents somewhere down the line, right? So you're accepting that risk. You don't say, oh no, okay, I'm not going to drive my bike because there is a potential for accidents to happen. So you accept that there might be accidents happening at some point somewhere, but you accept the risk that you are taking that risk. Similarly, in security terms, sometimes you will say, okay, this risk is small enough, right? Okay, this is a really small threat. I don't have this product across my organization. Maybe 1 or 2 things that cannot be fixed. And they are not critical. So I'll accept that risk. The next option is risk avoidance. You will eliminate the risk. You'll shut down the entire system or choose an alternative. For example, if you find a manufacturing device or a manufacturing mill that's producing a product that's like unsafe for children, something like that. So that's a big risk. So you eliminate that system from your production line. Similarly, in security, you might find products that are unfixable, but in order to fix that security problem, it'll take you a lot of money. So what you do is you eliminate the system from your pipeline. The next aspect is risk transfer. One of the examples is sending your risk to insurance. Another aspect is outsourcing it. You might find managing a product that's say insecure or relatively difficult. You might transfer that responsibility to a third-party organization that can support the product, and they have the money to do it. So that's one way of managing risk. The last option, and that's something that's liked by professionals, reducing risk. So you ask management to spend a certain amount of money so that you are able to upgrade the product, you are able to patch all the security flaws, and you are able to implement controls around it so that it remains secure for the rest of its lifetime. So risk reduction is ultimately what we want, but when it comes to us balancing cost and workability, you have to sometimes take other options as well. Remember, it's not always possible to eliminate risk 100%. Sometimes there will always be this residual thing that you won't be able to fix. So you just have to explain that properly to management. You should not ignore it. You should not say, okay, this exists, so nobody's going to hack this system. It's lying down somewhere in the corner. So I'll just ignore it. So you have to explain that to management and have them accept that risk. Say, this system exists. It cannot be patched. The cost is prohibitive, but we have all these security controls around it so that nobody can get into it that easily. So there is a risk around it, but it's not big. So just explain it to your managers, keep them aware. that this exists. So it's not just something for you to sweep under the carpet. Any questions? All right, the last concept, defense in depth. I think Kishore, right? He asked the question, I have a website, it's protected by SSL. Is there any software that prevents hackers from coming in? And I told him it's just not about one aspect. You have to protect things at different layers. So if you have seen the Lord of the Rings movie, I'm a really big fan of it. So that's one memory from my college. So this is the city of Gondor, the Minas Tirith fort. It had 7 levels where the citadel was located at the top. And in the movie, they'll find it really difficult to breach and get up to the king's chamber, just because of the different layers of protection it had, different levels of protection it had. Similarly, while data is at the core of your security policy, you have to protect it at every level. So your data will be interacting with the application, like your databases, your web application. You have to have input validation. You have to ensure that only secure operations are made on the data. Then you have applications that are running on servers, on systems. So you got to have controls on the host so that only authorized people are able to access the server. Only authorized people are able to make changes. You have to implement antivirus, anti-malware technologies on it. Then you have your network on which the server resides. So you have to implement firewalls, intrusion prevention systems, intrusion detection systems. Then you have your physical security. Most likely your networks, your servers will be housed in data centers. You have to ensure only authorized personnel are able to get into those systems and into those buildings. You have to have like one-way doors or protective fencing. You have to have cameras around. So things like that. Then you have your policy and procedures. So I think this is the most important part. Your security implementations have to come from top down. You have to be able to convince your CEOs, your managers to invest in developing policies and procedures around which every user in your organization can follow. You simply cannot deploy technologies without a consent or without taking policy and procedures. So when a manager develops a policy, it becomes easy to follow and it becomes easier to implement for you. Any questions? All right. So quiz time. It's not meant to judge you or anything. Go to slido.com and enter the code. I'll activate the quiz. Let me know when you're able to log in. If you have any issues, let me know. So the quiz has, I think, 10 questions. 2 participants already in. Mithun, Ajay. Ten participants so far. Come on, where are the other 15? Any more people? I'll give you 1 minute. Okay, only so many joining. Okay, let's start. You should be able to see the question. You have 45 seconds to answer this question. Any answers? Come on, 12 people. Just select one thing, and nobody's going to judge you. Two more people. Sounds good. So risk avoidance is the correct answer because the company decides to remove the fueling pump. So let's go to the next question. One person has answered. Quick, we don't have time. All right. The correct answer is risk assessment. So because you're estimating the chance that a threat will occur. So, okay, this is your leaderboard. Archo's first, Vigneshwaran second, Mithun is third. Let's go. Next question. So we talked about the different teams. Quick. Three more. All right. So the answer is false. So yellow team is your software builders and your architects. So management and compliance advisors are usually the white team. Next question. Most important rule in ethical hacking. Come on, 6 more people. All right. The correct answer is agree on the rules of engagement, always get permission. So others are important as well, but always get permission. So leaderboard again. Congratulations to top 3. We'll move on to the next question. All right. So correct answer is gray hat because he did not get the permission to hack a personal Facebook page of Mark Zuckerberg. Next question. Forensic specialist is the correct option. So leaderboard. Mhm. 20 more seconds. Two more people. So most of you answered this right. So it's something you have and something you know. Next question. Ten seconds more. Okay. Majority of answered correct. It's called layered security. Interim leaderboard. Very good. Five seconds. All right. Correct answer, determine how easy to crack the password. Since last question. Twenty seconds. All right, the correct answer is vulnerability. So risk is when you calculate the potential that this weakness will be exploited. All right. Thank you everybody for participating, and congratulations to those who have answered most questions correct.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. See you next class.